It's more complex than that. But the simulators are there.
This was supposed to be part of our After Hours series, where we talked to different colleagues about their After Hours activities to learn more about Taiwan. But then I realized two things. One, it's not really an After Hours kind of topic, and two, I can make a full video about this. Today, we're going to talk about Taiwan's preparedness for a possible China invasion. Like news outlets and YouTube videos, we're going to compare and contrast Taiwan with the war in Ukraine. This is Jaime Ocon, one of our journalists here at TaiwanPlus, who does many of our defense stories. I asked him to join me at the couch to have a casual talk about this topic. Here at Taiwan Plus One, we're trying to incite people to learn more about these topics, and it's more entry level for the lay person. If you want to go more in depth, make sure to follow us on Taiwan Plus News and Taiwan Talks. And I sat down with Jaime. One of the things I really want to dive into is this idea of asymmetric warfare. As the world is seeing, the Ukrainian military is able to hold off on a much larger and well-funded Russian invading forces. The question is, can Taiwan do the same? There are many people on reserve that, if it comes down to war, they're going to be called to duty. But with only 4 months of training, does that really come about? Like, how prepared would that be? There's been a lot of criticisms about how this doesn't get anyone prepared. They're not civilians. They're technically armed forces.
Well, I think no military is perfect. The United States, where I'm from, there's criticism of not being too involved in Asia. There's the lacking Asian presence. And with Taiwan, I think particularly, from my friends have said, and they've compared that sort of training, conscription, I think, to people have made a comparison to like a summer camp, and that it's not as adequate as they thought it would be. And, I've never had that experience of being in there, but I think that's one of the major reasons why they're pushing for this sort of asymmetric warfare.
Jaime, can you explain asymmetric warfare in a more newsy and serious voice?
Throughout history, people have gone to war for countless reasons. But the victor hasn't always been the one with the larger army. For a small nation like Taiwan, which neighboring China has threatened to take by force, the conflict in Ukraine is offering valuable lessons in defense strategy, particularly when faced with an army of greater capacity.
The reason why Ukraine is able to hang on there and to destroy so many of the Russian military hardware is because of their asymmetric capability. What asymmetric capability means is that we use smaller or more mobile but more lethal type of defense with a lower cost type of capability that is able to deter a major military force. And we want to procure the kinds of systems that are suitable for the asymmetric warfare on our part.
Asymmetric warfare describes armed conflict between opposing forces with significantly different military capabilities. China spends 17 times more on defense than Taiwan, with roughly 400 nuclear warheads and the world's largest navy. While Taiwan has anti-ship missiles and air defense systems similar to those being used by Ukrainian forces against the Russians, there's another US-made weapon that both Taiwan and Ukraine want to purchase. Weapon systems like the howitzer would bolster Taiwan's defenses by acting as a strategic deterrent at a fraction of the cost of China's hardware. The howitzer is priced at roughly $700,000. Taiwan has also ordered more Stingers from the US, which is a portable anti-aircraft missile launcher. It only costs about $38,000, but can effectively take out Chinese fighter jets, which cost upward of $100 million each. Fighter jets that are increasingly flying into Taiwan's air defense zone.
You see a situation that China has been threatening Taiwan in a very serious way. And we don't have any luxury of waiting for 4 years, 5 years, or 10 years to beef ourselves up. We need to be prepared at any moment.
But there's a backlog on weapons deliveries from the US as the war in Ukraine enters its 4th month. And as Taiwan waits to receive this hardware, it's taking note of how it's being used on the battlefield. Guided by the Eastern European nation, which is proving to the world that small doesn't have to mean outgunned. Damon Lin and Jaime Ocon for Taiwan Plus. I think that's one of the major reasons why they're pushing for this sort of asymmetric warfare, where you're not relying on old school tanks, you're stacked up, traditional warfare. You're focusing more on smaller arms that are easy to use. I mean, you and me if we take a javelin course, we could probably learn how to fire javelin in maybe, I'd say 2 weeks to have mastery. Well, maybe not mastery, but proficient use. People in Taiwan are suggesting that they focus more on anti-ship missiles, anti-air defenses, handheld systems that they make it's this whole notion of a porcupine strategy. Very, very prickly to even touch Taiwan. And that way you don't have to rely on your armed forces. Because, Taiwan only has about 90,000 active forces compared to China, who's got maybe north of maybe 2 million. So it's one of the biggest pushes for this sort of asymmetric warfare.
So now that we know what asymmetric warfare is, what are some actual steps that Taiwan is taking to achieve this? Serious, Jaime? Take it away.
This is the Jianxiang drone, a so-called suicide drone. Its main purpose is to seek out targets, fly directly toward them, and then explode on impact. This model is one of Taiwan's first ever domestically manufactured suicide drones. Military analysts believe these drones could help deter naval attacks from across the Taiwan Strait.
中共对台湾的威胁来自于海上，今天过来这个舰翔的无人机，刚好就是反辐射的一种自杀无人机，对它的军舰实施自杀攻击。
Taiwan has lived with the threat of invasion for decades. Neighboring China considers the country as part of its territory and has vowed to bring Taiwan under its control by force if necessary. Recently, China has been ramping up its military presence around Taiwan's coastline. Experts believe that utilizing drones could go a long way to enhancing Taiwan's defensive capabilities.
你说的这个 drone 的用法，的确就是它可以发挥就是这种观察的效果。那你观察之后，你就可以用 anti-ship missile， 就是反舰飞弹，去攻击中国的这些 warship， 这是一个很好的方法。
Taiwan has a number of different types of drones in its arsenal, each meant for a different mission set.
There's very big varieties of drones, right? There is reconnaissance drones, homemade drones, long-range drones that can fire on the enemy. But again, war is about intelligence, preventing your enemy from surprising you.
In Europe, the war in Ukraine has demonstrated how drones can be used to fend off larger attacking forces. Ukraine's military has been using drones as a way to monitor Russian troop movements. This information then allows them to focus artillery fire on their targets.
Having the firepower now, and then knowing exactly what to use that firepower on, not a single round is wasted.
Taiwan's military expenditure still pales in comparison to China. Beijing spends almost 17 times more than Taipei in defense and has roughly 4 times the number of military aircraft. But experts say that drones like the Jianxiang provide a cost-effective solution, allowing Taiwan to help protect its borders without breaking the bank.
目前这个自杀无人机变成一个是比较便宜的一个弹药，我们通常称为是 low cost munition， 这对于抵消敌人的这个数量优势很有帮助。所以对台湾来讲，因为你的国防资源比较有限，你的 budget 你的预算比较有限，所以这些无人机就会变成台湾一个很好的选择。
Taiwan's military plans to procure more drones from the West while also developing its domestic drone capabilities. The country is hopeful that doing so can help ensure national security and avoid putting Taiwanese troops in harm's way. James Raynor and Jaime Ocon for TaiwanPlus.
One of the examples that you talked about in one of your reports was talking about the suicide drones that Taiwan is developing. Like, does that play into kind of the porcupine, the more defensive strategies that's coming about?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing China send drones into the ADIZ, and one of the biggest things that kind of stuck to me, the biggest idea that kind of surprised me is that I wasn't thinking about is that experts are saying that, well, if drones are coming to ADIZ, we should not fight, but we should send our own drones. We shouldn't scramble on military. We should, fight fire with fire. And my report about the suicide drones was talking about how, Taiwan's been developing its own drones for, I'd say, a couple decades now. And there's plans to purchase US-made Sea Guardian drones that are coming maybe in the next few years. But these suicide drones are a very cost-effective solution to take out maybe amphibious landing forces or another drone or maybe even a smaller tank. And it's because Taiwan's military budget isn't as big as China's or even the United States. And because it has limited resources, putting your money into this sort of munition, they're called loitering munitions when you kind of throw them away, it's very cost effective, and it is extremely effective in warfare as well, because you don't need to worry about a life. It's a machine. So having those drones as one of the first lines of defense, and even for security reasons, like for surveillance, it's a great method. And countries around the world, especially Turkey with its Bayraktar drone being used in Ukraine, they're taking note of this. And I think drones are going to play an increasingly more important role in warfare, especially just for surveillance reasons, because they're so cheap.
You got a double-digit kind of like planes coming to the ADIZ. It was like, whoa.
Incursion,
like incursions come in, like, whoa. And then now we get like triple-digit. Did you ever imagine like you'd be reporting such large numbers?
Well, we haven't gotten to triple digits yet, but double digits is becoming more and more apparent. I mean, when I first started working at TaiwanPlus, that was a year and 3 months ago, and that was maybe, I would say maybe 3 a day, 4 a day, and we're still seeing kind of that amount daily, but the frequency in which 10 or more incursions happen in a day is getting higher. And I mean, last year, 2021, we saw 971-ish incursions. We're in November and we're at 1,400, and it is alarming, and it does put stress on any military. But even towards the end of last year, Taiwan's Air Force said that they was going to stop scrambling jets every time an incursion happened, because, I mean, in the conversations that I've had with experts in my reports, they're saying that two of the biggest costs are jet fuel and tires. I mean, it costs 20 grand to replace tires for an aircraft. Taiwan has a fleet of over 200, 300 aircraft. That's an enormous cost on any military.
Some people may feel that it's because of the war in Ukraine that Taiwan is starting to bolster its military, increase its defense spendings, and develop its own domestic military equipment. But Taiwan's actually been doing that for a very long time. It's the war in Ukraine that's been bringing light to these efforts.
It's more complex than that. But the similarities are there. The similarities of this big David versus Goliath narrative of a smaller nation who might not be well armed is against this bigger nation that is. But the differences outweigh the similarities, I think 100%, because the biggest difference is geography. Ukraine shares a border with Russia, so it made it very easy for Russia to roll in tanks and do what it needed to do in the first 2-3 days. But as we know right now, that didn't work out. Taiwan is 100 miles across the Taiwan Strait from China. And if China was to do the same thing, it would require hundreds of thousands of troops and assets just to even make that attempt. And being an island, and Taiwan is actually much better equipped than Ukraine, we would see an amphibious invasion if that was going to happen, unlike we've ever seen before. So I think the differences are huge.